Well, thank you so much for having me here. Your home is absolutely beautiful.
Happy to be here with you.
Thank you. Yeah, I wish it was a little warmer, but so, you and I were talking beforehand just about the work that I do and how many podcasts I've done so far. And this is the one I'm most excited about. So
Wonderful.
Yeah. I've interviewed.
I hope I live up to it.
I've interviewed executives and, amazing women who, of course, I get excited about. But for you, just reading your research and using it in my own research and putting it in my dissertation and teaching it to my students to actually be able to meet with you a few times and speak with you is just amazing. So I'm very happy to be here today.
Great.
Yeah. And this might be the only time that I actually fangirl out over somebody who's on the podcast. But yeah, so like I said, I've spent a lot of time in academia in the last couple of years of my career, and gender is certainly something that's of interest to me personally and professionally. And so I've done a lot of research and cited your papers a lot, but we also have a lot of non-academics that will be listening to the podcast. So can we just talk a little bit about some of your I know you have a vast amount of research, but some of the foundational research on gender, specifically starting with social role theory and what that means for the non-academics in the room.
Right. Well, social role theory gives a lot of emphasis to the way society is organized in terms of what, in this case, women and men do in their lives. And how that shapes their thinking and their behavior and everything around them. So it's a theory that gives a lot of importance to the fact that women and men actually are fairly segregated in life. In the home, not as extreme as it used to be, but there is still, a division of labor with women doing more of the child care, the cooking and other tasks. But even beyond that, in the labor force, we have a lot of segregation. Things have changed because most women are employed, and 75 years ago that wasn't the case. But women moved into a lot of service jobs, a lot of jobs demanding social skills as the economy changed.
Sure.
Where there are a lot of women.
Yeah.
And there's still not so many men in many other occupations. And even when women enter occupations that used to be fairly close to them, like being a physician, a kind of an internal segregation develops.
Oh, interesting.
Where women dominate pediatrics.
Okay, yeah.
And are very strong in gynecology and dermatology.
Sure, which makes a lot of sense, yeah.
Well, but does it?
Yeah.
Why not surgery?
Yeah.
But it's not surgery. So the fact that we're doing different things then kind of shapes us and our behavior along lines that are more traditional that a lot of us would like to acknowledge.
Yeah.
And so rather than seeing the personalities and behaviors of women and men as built in necessarily through evolution, we see them as being shaped by life experience more than many other gender theorists do.
Okay.
So around that division of labor, we develop stereotypes about women and men. They're not fictions. They're based on what we see. We see women doing a lot of activities that demand social skills.
Yeah.
And we see men much more working with things, building things, being engineers.
Yeah, tech. Yeah.
Tech and in tech. And then we get ideas about men and women being different. But we didn't make it up. We saw it.
Yeah.
And then that shapes us to be different. That shapes our own selves. And so it's a kind of a cycle that goes on. In which life experience and the social structure, the kinds of roles men and women have, are given a primary emphasis.
Yeah. So when you were saying dermatology and pediatrics, I said, oh, that makes a lot of sense. And you said, no, that doesn't make a lot of sense, actually. So let's say more about that. So the fact that women are going towards those careers, the notion that you have is that they don't always need to go in those careers. It just sort of happens that way because of the masses, or why is that happening? And what's your take on that? It's not because we're better suited for those. It's just we sort of go in those directions.
That's the big question. So to what extent might something be built in through evolution? And to what extent is it, we learned that we're like that we do those kinds of things because we've seen women doing those things.
Yeah, nurturing. And,
and the more nurturing and social skill demanding activities. And so ourselves get formed, our self-concepts and our goals, our life goals get formed in the world that we observe. And so they end up being somewhat gendered.
Yeah.
And then we go out, I'm going to be a physician. And then I'm in training and I think, kids are awfully nice. I want to do pediatrics. And that would be much more common in the woman in medical school than the man in medical school. So there it goes. And the causation may be mixed, but it is, I think, largely built in our world. And so it changes rather slowly.
Yeah.
As we have to see women doing these path-breaking women doing new things. And as girls, we would think of, maybe I could do that, like be president.
Yeah.
We have to have some thoughts that it might be possible for, a large number of women to develop different ideas. So it's a slow process.
Yeah. And is it almost less resistance, too, to go down the roles that seem more traditionally aligned?
Right. You may encounter resistance. I think many women in politics do. So, yes, it's easier. It's easier to do the conventional.
Not that being a doctor is easy by any means, but
no, it's a very demanding career. But, we see the same thing in universities with academic careers. We don't see that many women in mechanical engineering or electrical engineering or computer science. There are some. Where there used to be none, there are some.
Right.
And a lot of us I'm in psychology, in the social sciences, et cetera, in the humanities. Yeah, so we find that division
interesting.
that exists in our world, that it's slowly being modified, but since we're
very slowly,
formed
feels
by
like
what we see, it has a quality of perpetuating itself. The kind of division of labor that exists.
Interesting. And so, what made you study this to begin with, and how did your career come about in academia?
Well, as an undergraduate, I'd thought that maybe I would study science, maybe chemistry, but then I took courses in the social sciences and I found it more interesting.
Okay.
So you see, I'm doing the typical thing there. There were very few women in a field like chemistry way back then.
Sure.
And so I thought the social sciences, that's really interesting. You're still doing science, you're testing hypotheses, you're using
mathematical
data.
Still,
Yeah, and so it would take scientific skills, but it would be more engaging. And so I was in a kind of a general social science major as an undergraduate, and then I thought, social psychology, that seemed very central, in the social sciences, and you could do a lot of things in terms of social psychology. So then I picked out social psychology.
Nice. Okay. And you did your undergraduate at Harvard, is that correct?
No, at University of Michigan.
Oh, Michigan. Oh, that was your PhD work in Michigan. Okay, and your undergrad was that?
Yeah.
Okay.
And at that time, there was no field of gender.
Yeah.
Psychology of gender. What's that? That didn't exist because I got my PhD in 1965. That was
amazing.
Before the women's movement. And so there was no field like that. But I studied mainly attitudes and social influence.
Sure.
Which it was a very engaging field, very central to social psychology. But then with the women's movement, people started discussing gender, and they were asking very important questions that seemed like the kinds of questions social scientists should have answers to, or at least have studied. And for the most part, that was not the case.
You're like, what a perfect thing for me to study.
Yeah. And so I sort of wandered into it with some work, and then there was a lot of interest.
Yeah.
Because there'd been so little, I think, little done. And in a sense, the society was asking questions. And so then I proceeded. I still studied some other things, and particularly the study of attitudes, but then more of my work was in gender, and it developed in various directions.
Yeah. Interesting timing since the march recently happened now.
Yeah.
And similar questions are probably still being asked.
Right. Yes, there's very big questions. There's no bigger questions about life than about male and female.
Right. Yeah. So as you said, it is a slow process and evolution and advancement for sure.
Yes. And then the academic studies, they developed in, virtually all disciplines.
Yeah.
At least social science disciplines. And so it's been exciting. Yeah. And I like studying gender because it is very interdisciplinary.
Yeah, absolutely.
I pay attention to what the sociologist and the economist and the political scientists write. And they, to some extent, are interested in what I would write. And so it's kind of broad.
Yeah.
While many academic fields, you get into a little niche with
just very specific.
Just a relatively small group of others who do the same thing. But in this case, it's not like that.
Yeah.
It's very broad. And I enjoy that.
Yeah. And so let's talk a little bit more about social role theory. So you're saying women are more aligned with social skills. And so what does that look like? What does that mean? We mentioned nurturing and kindness and compassion. And I mean, what other skills are typically aligned with women or attributed to women, and then those aligned to men?
Okay, well, we have two themes that are often discussed and that are very powerful in stereotypes. And it's the communal and the agentic. And they are kind of like personality trait-like, but also would have skill components. And so it's the communal theme, of course, that is ascribed to women. And that would involve, wanting to help others. I mean, it is in general the idea of putting others kind of before oneself, of wanting to serve and help and nurture. And so the other theme, the agentic theme, is about getting ahead, being assertive and aggressive and going to your goal. And so that's, in a sense, it's a kind of in opposition, because that would be putting yourself first to get to your goal, while the communal theme is a lot about linking to others and being a positive influence on others.
Yeah, so this is fascinating, because you would think that the communal would be great for leadership, but...
Well, maybe it is.
Yeah, I think so. Being a servant leader is absolutely my mantra towards leadership. But typically agentic.
Agentic would seem to be useful in careers, right?
Right.
To get ahead, to get to the top, Yeah. You would need to ally with others in order to rise, of course, but it's in a different way. You're not like serving them. You're kind of allying with them in a team kind of way to assist your rise, right?
Yeah.
So it's not, men or people who are agentic are also social, but it's in a different mode.
Yeah. And so from the time that you've studied it until now, do you feel much progress? I mean, I know it's a slow going, but how do you feel about it from when you started in 1965, I think you said, till now?
Well, there's been a huge amount of social change. Yeah. Right. In that, that big shift of women into the labor force.
It's over 50%.
Yes.
Today. Yeah.
So there's a huge amount of change, but then as I already mentioned, what women don't realize, or people don't realize, it doesn't mean that women and men went into the same roles.
Right.
There is a continuing segregation. And so there's change, but still familiar patterns.
Yeah.
And so In terms of leadership, of course, we have seen men still dominating corporate leadership and political leadership with some change, right? So it's been slow, but we do find not very many more women as CEOs in the Fortune 500. That's one of the slowest.
4%, yeah.
And it's been kind of stuck there. It once moved up to 5.5, I think.
Yeah.
And then sometimes it moves down to 4 or 3. But in political leadership, we do see movement.
Yeah.
Where more women are in the Congress, but still quite the minority. And it's state legislatures, more usually, but still the minority. But now we have the excitement on the Democratic side of seeing several women.
Yes, several.
And the New York Times just endorsed 2 women as the favored candidates, Elizabeth Warren and Amy Klobuchar.
Yeah.
And at the end of their editorial, they said, "May the best woman win."
Interesting.
And I thought, wow, this is progress.
Yeah. I should have went into politics.
Yes. So there is progress. And it's so wonderful that we're seeing those debates where, I don't know, there were up to 4 women, with several women. I don't remember exactly how many. It changed between the various debates. But so we women get to see a variety of role models, right?
Right, yes.
It isn't just as it was the last time around Hillary Clinton, basically. It was Hillary Clinton, which was progress that we had.
Right,
Hillary
absolutely.
Clinton.
Whether you like her or not, it's progress.
But seeing this range of women doing it in different ways kind of will open up, I think, people's minds about how women can succeed. And then around the world, there have been many prime ministers, of course, who are women.
Yeah.
Over 50% of nations have had a woman as prime minister.
Oh, interesting.
We're just a bit slow.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
So on that note with Hillary Clinton, so in addition to social role theory, you've also developed role congruity theory. So can we talk a little bit about that? Because Hillary Clinton makes me think she kind of defies the roles, and that might actually hurt her a little bit.
Yes. Well, the role congruity idea recognizes that in life, people have a gender. Most of us are so-called cisgender. That is, we're in the gender socially that we were born into biologically. So we have a gender, but then there are roles out there that we may occupy or wish to occupy. Hillary Clinton wished to be president. And so the gender role that you have been given, in a sense, by society, which in terms of women has a strong communal emphasis, may or may not align with the role that you desire to have, such as a leadership role or an occupational role. Maybe you want to be an engineer or whatever, or you want to be a nurse. That one would be quite aligned with the definition we get of the female gender, because it's all about caring for others. President, not so much.
Yeah, no. Chicago cop, not so much.
Right, because those roles have a strong agentic theme.
Yeah.
Of being tough enough to compete and to get ahead and take care of everything. So that is somewhat in conflict with the gender role. And as people, we are expected to fulfill our gender role and our occupational role. And so that makes it more difficult, say, for a woman in a leadership role, if that requires agentic behavior. Yet as a woman, there's a demand to be caring and compassionate and to be more communal. So if you're in a leadership role, well, we'll just do both. But that's not so easy.
Right, yeah.
And so, as is well documented in many studies, women who are overtly competitive and dominant are often regarded with some suspicion.
Yeah.
And, you know, maybe disliked or sometimes actively resisted.
Yeah.
Met with hostility. So that's the problem. And then you could say, well, does leadership have to be like that, just for tough, agentic types? Well, maybe not. And we do see some change in the way people think about leadership over time, that they do think that it requires more social skills than they used to think, but it's still mainly more masculine and agentic.
Yeah.
And so this does create a difficulty. A book I wrote with my colleague Linda Carley about leadership was called Through the Labyrinth. And the labyrinth metaphor is meant to capture the sense of leadership being a more difficult task, a more difficult route. Like a labyrinth has puzzles and problems, and it's not a straight road. And so it's like the woman has to be very skilled to manage this.
Yes. I feel like I've lived that. Yeah.
Yes.
And it's sometimes forward, sometimes backwards, side to side.
Right.
Yeah.
It's simpler for men. Not that they don't have challenges, of course they do, but
sure.
They can more like be themselves, because the male role calls for being agentic, as does leadership.
Yeah.
And so you kind of relax more as a man and kind of be yourself. Well,
your authentic self, yeah.
If she's also this communal caring person, she would like to express that in her leadership role, of course. But if she just does that, it's probably not going to work well, first of all.
Yeah.
So it is just more complex and challenging for women. And yet some women do it great.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what could women do? I mean, because it is complex and more nuanced, it seems, for women.
Right.
And more at stake. So, I mean, is there anything we can do? I mean, I know there's a lot externally, environmentally that needs to change, but what could we do personally, individually?
Well, first of all, it's good to study this problem. And
it's my favorite topic, yes.
But I think women who are contemplating leadership or in leadership would profit from thinking about this problem in terms of role incongruity or whatever, just to realize, hey, there is a problem, because part of it is, figuring it out.
Right. Well, I think some men would say that we're imagining it, or...
They would. That would be a form of resistance. But still,
yes.
I think it's helpful for women to think about it and to realize that they have a somewhat different task than the men do. So you could say, well, if I do just what the men do, everything's fine because they're successful.
Right. Yeah.
Because then she'll probably get resistance from people who don't find her nice enough.
Yeah. And back to Hillary Clinton, I think that she does come off as more agentic, more competitive, more assertive. And I think at times that hurt her.
Right. And I think she worked at also giving a presence of being communal too.
Yeah.
I think she was quite aware. But there's no simple solution. We have that book that was so successful from Sheryl Sandberg that said lean in. Yeah. And I think there's a lot to that. But again, if you're just leaning in, you'll probably get resistance. So it's a little bit too simple.
Yeah.
But it's also true that for many women, I mean, the book was enormously successful. A lot of people bought it and read it, right? And I think for many women, they do hang back too much, as she says, not put up your hand, not speak when you have a chance to speak.
Yeah. Because
they feel they lack confidence or whatever. And so I thought that was a good message for many of us, to be more courageous. Speak up.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, I myself have done it. I've sat on the perimeter versus at the table. Right. Or I've held my thoughts and then somebody else says it. And I'm like, darn it, why didn't I just say it?
Right. And so that's a very good message that we do need to speak up.
Yeah. Now I won't shut up, but now I have the opposite problem.
But you got over that problem.
Right.
And it's there for lots of us. I've seen it so much in young women.
Yeah.
Perhaps even in my own environment where, in a university department where there's, you know, many discussion groups and have a speaker and there's discussion after. And many women have gotten over the hump, but I see these others who are sort of frozen.
Yeah.
And they're smart. They do have things to say.
Yeah, absolutely.
But they're not. They don't push themselves. So that's part of it. Make sure you're not one of those hanging back women.
Right.
But then,
Sit at the head of the table now.
right. When you do speak up, you know, do it appropriately.
Yes, of course.
And probably you can't get away with some of the things that the men might be able to get away with in terms of being harsher without getting backlash.
Yeah.
So, you know, just to be aware, but don't hang back. Do speak up. That's one thing we can do. But that's a problem only for some women. The rest of us who do speak up, we have to deal with potential backlash.
Yeah.
And we have to negotiate this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I lost my train of thought there. So back to your book on Through the Labyrinth. So the glass ceiling is typically the metaphor that's used for women. We have to shatter the glass ceiling and
Right.
then we're going to be all okay. And so you've mentioned a little bit about the labyrinth for women. Can you say a little bit more about why that's a better metaphor? I know you had a list of reasons for that.
Right. Well, the glass ceiling is altogether too simple.
Yeah.
It sort of suggests there is a barrier someplace up there
That keeps moving, apparently.
and then you can't get by it without crashing your head against it and maybe getting cut.
Yeah, right.
It's like a very dangerous thing to bash your head through a glass ceiling.
Right.
So it isn't like that. The challenges and barriers start at the very beginning of a career. You know, day one,
Yeah.
with your MBA or whatever in hand, and you have this job and you walk into the company. And then you may seem shy or not. You may speak up or not. You may be overly assertive and get backlash. It's all there at day one.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't sort of disappear that there's no barriers until you get near this high point. No, you're negotiating it throughout your career and learning, hopefully learning how to handle situations at work and how to be perceived as somebody worthy of leadership, etc. So it's wrong to to give the idea that it's just something that hits you later on. You know, it's the cumulative effect of everything that's happened in women's careers that produce the few women at the top, not a barrier that just sits right there.
Yeah. As I progress in my career, I start to think of it almost like a military strategy, which is probably a terrible way, but I mean, I have to think of it that I have to think strategically 2 steps ahead of people when I'm making moves in my career or internally or whatever it may be. And it took me going and being a police officer for 10 years because I was in business before, spent 10 years as a police officer, then came back to business and found myself much more effective.
Good. Well, that's great advice.
But you shouldn't have to go be a cop for 10 years.
Right.
But, you know, I picked up military principles. I studied military leadership and, you know, had more agentic exposure that I needed
among your colleagues.
Yeah. For mission critical, life-saving, you know, situations. And so I don't feel like you should have to go do that to be effective in business, but it has helped me for sure.
Yes. Yeah. You had a lot of male role models there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. And just started to think about business a little differently rather than letting it happen to me. Mm-hmm. I'm going to navigate and dictate the way it happens and think more strategically. So the labyrinth, I think, makes sense, of course. But I've just started to think about it in that way, that it's somewhat of a game. And
and there are many different kinds of challenges, aren't there? Yeah. And so it's not just one that people are resisting you when you're speaking up. No, there's many kinds of challenges. So,
and each company's different, each environment's different.
So it takes a developing of expertise, as you suggest, learning from others. That's terribly important. And then being, being intelligent in the sense that you are open to learning. You don't think, oh, I'm here. Don't they realize I'm here and I'm good? No.
Who's going to tap me on the shoulder? And
right.
That's never happened to me.
No, you have to realize the labyrinth's not bad. Think about it as a labyrinth. There's some goal you have in the center, but it's going to be a challenge, and you need to think about it. You need to be alert. You need to learn from your environment. Right.
Yeah.
You will make mistakes, but, hopefully not fatal ones in terms of your career, and you can then rethink and whatever.
Yeah. So going back to my train of thought that I lost. So I wanted to talk a little bit about imposter syndrome. And and how it typically afflicts high achieving women more than men.
Well, actually, it's been questioned.
Yeah. I mean, there's kind of different schools of thought on that.
Yeah, I haven't pursued it in research, but I've seen one or two papers where people say, no, that is not a real thing. Other people think it is, but it would be the notion that you feel you don't deserve to be there, you don't have the skills or something.
Yeah.
And that certainly can happen to people, maybe more to women, but, it's not one of my favorite concepts. I think in a sense, it's harder for women to get to certain kinds of goals in male-dominated environments, and so they're a bit overqualified, if they've been held back. And some studies show that in terms of there was one study about, federal government roles, that the women had more education and more years of experience systematically for rising to each level. And so they are overqualified.
Sure.
And so I have my doubts if they think they're underqualified. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah. I was going with that in that because there are these special roles, and then if you act outside of that role, then there's resistance. It starts to cause internal conflict.
Yeah, right.
If your confidence a bit.
If other people aren't acknowledging your competence, then that's a bit of a blow, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. And so back to your book on Through the Labyrinth, the truth about how women become leaders. Can you talk a little bit more about if people resist women's leadership more than men's?
Well, yes, there are many studies that show that insofar as it's enacted in a fairly dominant style. But sometimes it's just the fact you're there. I think in some cases, in some nations in particular, just the fact a woman is in a political role, she may get death threats or whatever. I mean, that people would be hostile towards her just because she's there as a woman. But in more normal situations, what we see in studies is that when women are clearly enacting leadership in a fairly dominant top-down style, ordering people around, that they get resistance that a man would not get. Okay. He could sort of get away with that. So it's also true that, and this is in some work that I did, actually a meta-analysis where we gathered together many studies to look for overall patterns, that it is to some extent true that women enact leadership in a more participative, democratic way. That's possible in organizations. There is some range of, how you do it. And you can do it sort of aligning yourself with others, or you can do it by just telling them what to do. You could come and say, well, we have a problem, let's think about it and decide. Yeah. Or you could say, do this. And women are more likely to use the more democratic participative mode. And that makes sense because of the resistance that they might get otherwise. I particularly noticed Nancy Pelosi on one encounter where the press was there about when they were going to pass on the articles of impeachment. And they kept asking her, well, what are you going to do? And she kept saying, well, we are going to decide this. We are going to decide this together, the group of us. And those were the leaders in the House. And I thought, wow, that's probably true. That's probably is how she'll do it, although she has the most powerful voice, certainly.
Yeah.
But that was what I would regard as more typical of a female leader. If a man had been in her role, he might have said, well, I'll decide later.
Right,
Or,
yeah,
I will
yeah.
decide. Don't worry, I will decide. And she kept saying, well, and she would kind of gesture. There were other leaders around her from the house. She would gesture at the group
Yeah.
and say, we are going to decide that.
This is fascinating because I certainly align more with Nancy Pelosi's style, where
Yeah.
I want people to have skin in the game and feel like they
Right.
have a voice.
Right.
And
It
but
works.
now I'm questioning it all. Yeah.
Well, it works.
Yeah.
It's one way that leadership can work and be effective,
Yeah.
depending on the traditions of the organization or whatever. Or you can do it more in the directive top-down
Yeah.
style. So one way women negotiate the labyrinth or the role in congruity is by, in fact, being more participative. And then you would get less resistance because they're part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's, I think, really important.
Yeah. I mean, I think even for men too, I don't know that anybody likes to kind of slam your fist on the table to tell you what
yeah.
to do.
But a woman won't get away with it,
No.
or she would be roundly disliked, hated.
Yes. Oh gosh, this is fascinating. So another thing that you mentioned in your book is the lack of access to powerful mentors and networks.
Mm-hmm.
So can you say a little bit more about that and why it's important for women?
Well, it's important for anyone. So if you move into a male-dominated organization, you know, there would be men who have their networks.
Right. They're golf buddies.
Yeah, they're golf buddies, or they go out for drinks after work or something. And maybe you have a child and need to go home.
Yeah.
I mean, you would think dads would have the same feeling,
Right,
but
right.
dads may think it's okay to go out for drinks and come home late. So it's, you know, and maybe you wouldn't be welcome. All of a sudden, their drinking group has this one woman in it.
Yeah.
Maybe they would have to monitor their behavior or something, they might think. Or watch out what they say.
Yeah.
Not say anything sexist. And now we can't say anything sexist.
Yeah.
And so it is difficult that there would be some difficulty in joining the male networks, and then there might be female networks, but there might be too few of you to be much of a network.
Right.
And so maybe you reach out to women in other organizations who are similarly placed. That might be helpful. But it is a disadvantage. And then if there weren't women in the leadership group of the organization, you don't have the role models to see how a woman does it successfully.
Yeah.
So it's a disadvantage. So it gets mitigated to the extent there are more women, right? So it's a very gradual process.
Yeah.
So if you're the first woman, you're in a disadvantageous position. But then maybe they hire another woman, and then there's three of you, and they will lobby for hiring more women. And so that if it's more balanced, there might even be networks that are integrated.
Yeah.
So it's a gradual process, but there is this disadvantage often, particularly the early women, the breakthrough women,
Yeah.
to face. We can thank them for doing what they do.
And what could men do? Because I've had great male sponsorship,
Yeah.
so I don't want to beat up all the men.
No.
I think some of them don't know what the heck to do or how they can be
Right.
supportive or, kind of
That's
change
true.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, they can be very helpful. They can offer advice. They can speak up on your
Yeah.
behalf.
So not just mentorship, but sponsorship.
Sponsorship,
Yeah.
right. That's right. And that is terribly important. So if women are outside of networks and then the men don't think of them to sponsor them when they're talking about candidates for some appointment.
Yeah.
So certainly they can do that. They can be mentors and sponsors. Right. And they can also advocate for hiring more women.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that the situation would be easier for those that are there.
Yeah. Good. That's good. And so I would say, some critics, male and female, would say that some of what we're talking about, these biases and prejudices, don't exist? I mean, what do you say to those folks?
Well, they see a different kind of world where there's just, everything is individual effort and achievement.
Sure.
And we don't prevent women from doing that.
Right, right. Well, I had one senior leader tell me that women leave the workforce when they have a child and then they come back less experienced, and that's why they're paid less.
Well, that is one determinant. Actually, economists who study the pay gap, that's in the data, so to speak.
Sure.
That the more inconsistent work pattern and actually lesser work hours predict wage. So that's not a ridiculous idea.
Right.
But it does place women at a disadvantage insofar as then, the home division of labor is that she is doing most of the child care.
Right.
And that he doesn't feel obligated to rush home to care for the baby
Yeah.
or whatever. Yeah.
They don't have the mommy guilt that.
Yeah, but that is an accurate statement, but it's sort of the problem is kind of built in then. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that is one of the challenges in the Labyrinth is if a woman does choose to have children, how will that be managed in relation to her career?
Yeah.
And what kind of partner? Sheryl Sandberg wrote quite wisely, find a partner who's a real partner.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
My husband loves to do laundry, so.
That's great. Mine does too.
Yeah.
Mine does it. So that's part of the Labyrinth. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay, good. Well, now we've had kind of a serious discussion, but it was super valuable and I loved hearing your perspective. Now I'm going to read you some quotes that have been said by men in the workplace. And I just kind of want to get your gut reaction. And it's not meant to, beat men up more. It's just kind of meant to call out some of the ridiculous thoughts that are out there and make it more of a conversation in kind of a humorous way, I suppose. So the first one I'll read to you is from a Fortune 500 CEO. And they said it's good karma for women to refrain from asking for a raise. It's not really about asking for a raise, but knowing and having faith that the system will give you the right raise.
Wow.
Yeah. And I could say which company it is, but I won't do that.
Well, the system knows that women are paid less. So then it will pay you less.
Right.
So,
it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right.
Yeah.
And so how do you change that? Well, I think that bringing up the issue, it is sensible, right? Not just assuming that it'll work out.
Just wait. Yeah. We just wait it out.
If you know that you're underpaid relative to others who happen to be male, if it's not like happening for you, it is appropriate to bring it up in a reasonable way, in a calm way.
Yeah.
Presenting
facts and the value you bring
and the value you bring, and that is it correct and fair that I would be paid less, but not, if this is something that is happening to you as an individual, I think bringing it up in an unemotional and calm way is entirely correct and can work.
Yeah. So you said something interesting there, the unemotional. So we had a previous guest on. She's the senior vice president at Morton Salt. So she manages a huge organization, 2,500 people. And she said similar things, that to be sort of unemotional and even keel. And why do you think that's so important for women?
Well, stereotypically women are emotional.
Yeah.
And so we fall into a negative part of the female stereotype.
Yeah. And I think men sort of just tune out if they sense that emotion or over emotion. Or,
Not that they don't get emotional. They can get angry emotional.
Right, right.
But, and they can more get away with it. But it is a negative part of the female stereotype that we're not tough, and so we cry instead.
Yeah.
And, and so I think we have to not embody this more negative stereotype, right? So I do think that being calm in that sort of situation is very important.
Yeah. So that's a great tip. And piece of advice for women is to you almost have to practice it beforehand too.
Right. That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, you might. Even if you're in a room by yourself.
Yeah, you're right.
You can imagine your boss sitting there. But or even if you could practice it with somebody else, that would be very good. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, interesting. Okay, so I have a couple more to read. So this was from Matt Lauer, and obviously he's gotten beat up in the media for his own actions. But he, in an interview, he said to the General Motors CEO, "You're a mom. You said in an interview not long ago that your kids told you you're going to have to be accountable for one job, and that is being a mom." And he said, "Given the pressures of this job at General Motors, can you do both well?"
I hope she said yes.
Yeah. Yes, she did. And he himself is a father of 3, but that didn't seem to affect his career.
Yeah.
Nor does he get asked about that.
Yeah. Well, sure. It is hard to be in a demanding, a time-consuming role and to be an adequate parent, but it's wrong to think that, or it's part of the old division of labor that the woman is the main carer, the main child taker, and the man is, he helps he plays with the children once in a while.
Yeah.
Insofar as that prevails, then women have more of a problem than men do, but I hope she has a partner who's a real partner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. And then I did want to touch a little bit, just because the Women's March, was recently happening. How would you describe being a feminist?
Oh, well, I think in general, it means you have a commitment to furthering equality between men and women.
Yeah.
And that would be in terms of equal access to power and resources.
Okay.
Yeah. And we're a long ways from that goal.
Yeah, absolutely. I think feminism gets sort of a negative connotation to some degree today. And so that's why I wanted to hear your take on it. And because people consider themselves feminists, I don't think that means they hate men. I think that's maybe the connotation that goes along with it.
Well, it shouldn't.
Right.
Right. Equality would be consistent with American values, that people are not, by race or by gender or other characteristics, they're not put in a lower category. Yeah. And they should not have less resources simply because they're of a different race or simply because they're women. So I think it's fully consistent with American values. And so it shouldn't be problematic. But, there maybe is some sense people have it's rather a zero-sum game. So if you take power away from men and share it with women, men have less. Well, that is true, by the way. I mean, if our Congress were 50-50, women and men, there would be fewer men.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think people should see that in terms of a larger human goal of that's a good one, of equality between the sexes.
Yeah. You said that so beautifully, and you make it seem like, duh, like it makes perfect sense.
Yeah. So it's not about hating men, but it is about trying to create understanding that it is a good goal.
Yeah.
And that sharing power means, for instance, sharing leadership. And yes, women could do it. Perhaps they might do it a little bit differently, as I think Nancy Pelosi is doing it a little bit differently. But it seems to work really well. Yeah.
Good. Okay. Well, appreciate your time. What can we expect next for you? Any research in the books or?
Well, I have been working on not specifically so much on leadership, but some of the bigger issues that are out there. And one is gender stereotypes and whether they've changed.
Okay.
And why or why not. And so we have a project that used public opinion data, which has nationally representative samples, which is a very good thing, going back to 1946.
Oh, my goodness. Wow.
Where people were answering questions about essentially the personality traits of men and women. And so that's like a big question thing. And then another big question, this is more a kind of a psychologist's question, but it's really a question for everyone. It's basically about sex differences and similarities. You know, some psychologists claim all these sex differences are really small, and others say they're really big. And we have these stereotypes about difference. So how could we say, actually, men and women are the same or virtually the same? But other psychologists show other kinds of data and show that men and women are very different. So I think it has a lot to do with the way psychologists or researchers organize the data, and that they are both small and large, depending on the kind of level of abstraction that you're dealing with. And so I'm writing a paper with a colleague that's trying to explain all this in terms of the kinds of ways we deal with data as psychologists. And if we understand what we have done, we can see it's pretty consistent with what people think in everyday life. So it's a kind of a really big picture project.
Yeah, neat. Well, when will that be ready?
That one, we're just finishing the paper. The stereotype project is soon to be published in a journal called The American Psychologist.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. Your wealth of
You're
information.
welcome.
And this was a delight. So really appreciate it.
Been wonderful talking to you, Karen.
Thank you.